Buttons are often where we spend a big chunk of our time and effort in web design, but it's not uncommon for them to not always land with our users the way that we expected them to. So I'm going to share with you my list of the top 5 mistakes we make in web button design and how to avoid them, so that your web designs and interfaces can stay optimal while still being beautiful and professional. They're those simple but indispensable interface widgets that are the backbone of web UI design. Except they're not always that simple. As a designer, buttons are crucial for establishing your design language and brand. And as a web developer, there are a few interface elements that you're going to spend as much time and pay as much attention to than the button. On the web, buttons have a very specific role to play, but quite often our design choices can make very small yet significant mistakes that you might not notice all that much at first, but they can affect your users in such a way that can make the difference between your design being good and being great. I've been doing web design and development for over 20 years now, both as a hobby and a profession. And yeah, sure, I'm just one of these grumpy, old, very opinionated men when it comes to all of this stuff. But because I live in that very lonely space of both designing and building my own websites and web apps, I tend to have a very unique perspective on what is arguably a very unique discipline of web design. So here's the list of my top 5 mistakes that I see all the time when it comes to web buttons. Okay, mistake number 1, bad button labels. This is the most common and easiest mistake to make when it comes to buttons. See, very often you'll find buttons with long descriptive labels like view all articles, or choose selected items, or reject optional cookies. Those types of labels make for very long buttons that are difficult to place inside of your layout, particularly when you're working with mobile interfaces. And on top of that, they can look very crowded and awkward. Unless you're purposefully going for that busier look, long button labels don't really give you a clean, streamlined interface. Instead, opt for shorter button labels, 1 or 2 words. The best labels are verbs or adjectives, words that imply the result, not descriptive of the action itself. So instead of using view all articles, just use view all. Unless you're in a section with 10 other things, if you're looking at a list of articles with an appropriate header like articles, then it's pretty clear that a button that says view all means articles. And the same goes for all the other examples. You see, this leverages the fact that most of us don't read, we scan, and then intuit how those interfaces work. Using short button labels while creating context with the surrounding content itself makes it easier for your users, because it makes your UI more streamlined and intuitive, with the added bonus of being more aesthetically pleasing. Mistake number 2, buttons that don't look like buttons. In some design philosophies, like flat design, it can become difficult to differentiate what is and isn't a button. Even in other design philosophies, it's common to see buttons that share a lot with the content itself, making it less obvious what is and isn't a clickable element. If your button design isn't distinct enough at a glance from your content, headings, labels, and other textual elements, you're making it just that bit harder for your users. So, when you're designing buttons, pick shapes, spacings, colors that you don't use anywhere else in your content or for any other decorative element on the page. But be restrained when trying to differentiate your interactive elements, because sometimes it can lead to another problem. The third thing that we all get wrong with buttons: too many different types of buttons. Does your design system have specific designs for a primary button, a secondary button, a tertiary button, an icon button, a text button, a toggle button, an action button, and a submit button? Then my question to you is, why? I've seen many systems where buttons that have the same type of behavior when clicked use completely different designs. Usually, this is done to draw even more attention to finer context differences, or to make the button more in line with the content that surrounds it, like when buttons are placed alongside an input being different to when they're placed below them, or completely different button designs for those smaller interface elements. And for the most part, I can totally understand that. From an aesthetic design perspective, sometimes you want those small visual differences so that your design can fit a little bit better. But that can totally mess with the functional design principles of making UI streamlined and intuitive. So here's my wildly unpopular opinion. You need a grand total of 2 button designs, 1 call to action and 1 standard button. Your call to action button is the one that is going to perform the primary action of your page, not just your interface. It's the one you want your users to click the most. It's the one that's going to convert. It's a button like checkout or add to cart. These buttons commit to a choice. so they need to stand out more. And they're lonely, one per page or one per section, if that section is separated far enough from the others. The standard button is for everything else. And if you're screaming at me right now, what about icon buttons? That's a non-issue. An icon button is nothing more than your standard button that uses an icon instead of a text label. So why do I say this? Why such a rigid view on the matter? Well, imagine this. You buy a house that has a different door handle on every single door, and every room has a different type of light switch mechanism. Not only is that aesthetically disjointed, it's functionally problematic. In those cases, muscle memory is more difficult to form. The same thing goes for software interfaces. You want them to be consistent and intuitive so that the brain can engage its automatic processes and your users can be clicking around the website quickly, easily, without thought. Mistake number 4, buttons are too flashy. I've seen and built many buttons in my time, and I can tell you without a doubt that the most successful buttons at being buttons are the ones that are plain, simple, and boring. If your buttons shift and grow and spin and dance and sing, well, chances are you've wasted a lot of time and effort on them, because the truth is, it's not going to make your interface any better. And sure, it will grab attention. It might delight your users a bit. It might be a memorable thing for them. It might even be a really good exercise for you as a designer and a developer. The truth is, however, the novelty of those types of effects wear off really quickly. And unfortunately, in many cases, a lot of your users may not be paying enough attention to even notice or care. The thing your users are going to remember most about your buttons aren't all those slick transitions and effects. It's going to be how the button worked. Did it feed back to them when they clicked it? Was the action immediate or was there a lag? And that's where it's more valuable for you to focus your interaction design. Having said that, buttons shouldn't be completely static. You do need some sort of visual indicator that the button is focused, and a down or active state is also a very important visual cue that the button has registered the click. But more often than not, we focus a lot of our design in the hover state, and in most cases, it's a complete waste of time. The majority of internet traffic is coming from mobile devices. Some statistics suggest that that's about 60%. So, the majority of your users are likely going to be visiting your website and web apps on a mobile device. And almost every mobile device on the market uses a touch interface. And what's the one thing that touch interfaces lack? That's right, hover. So, unless you know from your own stats that the majority of your users are desktop users, which implies a pointing device, then you should be developing and designing mobile touch first. And in those cases, use the simplest, easiest to develop hover states, because all those wonderful transitions and effects for hover that you've designed simply won't land the way you imagine them to on a touch device. So don't waste your time on them. Focus your attention on more meaningful transitions. Okay, mistake number 5, buttons for links. This is the one I think about most. This is the one that keeps me up at night. But calling it a mistake is a bit tricky because it's become a convention. And once something becomes a convention, it kind of rewrites the rules. But convention is not correctness. But more importantly, I would argue that this one convention is actually breaking a core concept of web design. And what I mean by that is it's actually going contrary to a fundamental principle of the hypertext markup language design. You see, in computing, a button is a graphical widget that triggers an event or an action. In HTML, it has a narrower application to forms and a very small set of APIs. Now, while clicking a button may have the side effect of loading a new page, for example when submitting a form, that is in fact only a side effect of submitting the form. But in web, what a button is most definitely not supposed to do is link directly to another page. That's what the anchor is for, and anchors should not look like buttons. And this is also exactly why, when you do try and make anchors look like buttons, you have to explicitly define the styles for them. Because again, anchors are not meant to look like buttons, nor are buttons meant to look like anchors. Have you ever noticed when building a website that buttons by default do not have that little finger pointer cursor? And that you have to go in and specifically give it that style? Well, that's because in the HTML spec, An anchor with a href creates a hyperlink, and in the CSS spec, a finger pointer cursor is meant to indicate a link. What that boils down to is that buttons were never meant to navigate through pages. So what that means is that in all those places where you are using a button design to link to another page, those are meant to be anchors. Anchors are meant to look like text, and it's not meant to be a button because it doesn't perform an action. So even though this has become a convention, why not give it a go? Use a text anchor that looks like text instead of a button. You can make it visually distinct by maybe putting an icon after it, using a bigger font, giving it a higher weight. At best, you notice it works better for your design and you keep it. At worst, you or your users don't like it and you revert. The important thing is, you'll know I'm getting a bit better sleep because you gave it a shot. And there you have it. My top 5 ways in which we are all getting buttons wrong on our websites and web apps, and some ideas on how we can change those patterns. I hope you found it useful, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. If you decide to take on any of these opinions, I'd love to know how they worked out for you. Drop me a message in the comments and let me know. If you found this video useful, you enjoyed it, and you'd like to see more, then hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel, and let me know what you think in the comments. If you do, I'll know that you enjoy my old man grumpy ranting, and I'll continue to make more of them. Until next time, happy designing, happy coding. Thanks for watching.